Hey, what's happening, audience? Welcome back. In this video, I want to talk about something that is quite obvious but often overlooked. And as I talk, I mean, it's best if you are observing what I'm talking about at the same time. Otherwise, there's no really much point. It's just an exchange of information and hasn't got really any more value than just entertainment. But you can get way more value if you are actually doing that as I'm talking. Because even right now, as I'm about to talk about it, what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna be looking at it directly, fresh, and not speak from the memory necessarily. But I I raise a question. I raise a question, and this question pertains about subjective and objective reality and what makes other people or others through the view of reality being holographic. I mean, the good question to ask is at what point there are others, because it's a um, it's almost like a trick question because depends on the state that you're observing the reality from. If you're in a complete zero point, um, there's not necessarily an experience of otherness because there is an experience of everything just flowing as it is in a perfect way, and you don't experience otherness, right? But that state is not usually kind of functional, right? Like you don't move through life being in that state. It'd be really freaking weird. You would be walking around looking super high and won't be able to interact with the people in a normal way because to you the people would, as they approaching you, for you to be just funny pictures and colors moving around. So it's almost like a baby type of view of the world. But the reality is that you can have that background feeling of oneness and at the same time have your consciousness function on other levels too. And that's actually the whole point of developed consciousness is the spectrum of all possible states in a coherent manner. And so that's how you live a full spectrum of consciousness. So and if you were listening to my videos and you were actually doing these exercises, which was like just to look look at the something that you're attentive, and in between that attentiveness and an awareness, which is the space, and there's somethingness and nothingness in between somethingness and nothingness. There's that awesomeness, and the more you focus there, the more you go there, the more it's going to take precedence in your background of your experience. Um, and anything that is in contrast with that will stand out like a sore thumb, and as I call it, you're going to have to alchemize. uh, but this video I particularly want to talk about, you know, uh, what happens in a day-to-day life, and if we are essentially creating our own reality. And I'm not saying very loosely just like as like a fancy way uh, of communicating this. I'm actually talking about the direct experience of this process. Like, for example, the way I see everything, the way you see everything, actually, if you look at it, is there are feelings. For example, if there's anything that is experienced to be not ideal in this particular moment, you can see it as perhaps negative thought, negative emotion, or negative feeling. And the whole point is to go to the root source of that negative feeling. And that negative feeling is ego. It is not necessary to be online at any point. It is not necessary to be online at any point to be functional and very functional in this game of life. However, it sometimes appears. You go to the root cause of it, and you can't deny that it's a feeling. It's when you pack the thoughts into emotions into feeling, you will find that there's just a feeling that you may call ego, or you may call the center of I, or whatever you want to call it. But there's a type of process. And as you do, you keep training yourself to disconnect that process. Basically, you go become attentive of that negative feeling and the space around it. And as you do so, there is a dissolution of the negative feeling. And if it's stubborn, then you don't force it, you just stay with it, and that dissipates. And then you go into the space of very still peace, perhaps, which is sort of like the untainted space. That space can never be tainted. It's like a black hole. And like, I don't know if you've ever seen the picture of black hole, quote unquote, sun. There's a black hole, and there's this, you can call it event horizon glow, right? And you can see that there is this almost like a black star. Now, the reason it's black is because it's void of any content. And so as you move to that state, it's absolutely still. Nothing can take place there. Then you kind of tune yourself in there. And because nothing that can take place there, all the noise remains around it. And there's one thing I have to say about that black hole, is that's just my personal theory, that every black hole must have a neutron star inside it. And when there's peace and you have that void, the bubble of void, which is a focus that you tune into, and you find it within yourself, it's like, holy shit, this is the most peaceful place ever. And it's accessible to you at the moment's notice. And the way I see it, it's almost to everybody. But the second part, which is the bliss part, it appears that grows and arises the more you go to that 0 point and bring something that is old matter, which would be something like matter, and then that is compacted back into the primordial structure, which you would call truth. So nothing remains in that 0 point except the feeling of bliss, because that's ultimate truth. And so sometimes people may say, like, well, what is absolute truth? Is there such thing as absolute truth? Absolute truth is a feeling. It is a feeling that has packed everything, or before it was unpacked in a temporal reality, it was an infinite feeling, and it's experienced as bliss, or that's the name that's been given to that energy. Orgon is another energy. Excuse me, another name for that energy. Okay, and as you can see, that energy can only live in that black hole void. Okay, and that is your center, that is your axis, that is your 0 point, that is the beginning of everything in consciousness. This is where you start. That's where you start, actually. And the way you uh, accommodate yourself there, I have to say something that, again, this is my personal experience, that it appears that when there is a discovery of that focus, that particular focus, that is capable of alchemizing all of those negative thoughts, negative feelings, negative emotions. And I'll tell you in a second what else, which is the same thing, but we'll get to the point. What happens is that you're beginning to gravitate towards that center, right? And not be that thing that is spinning around the black hole, right? Not that matter thing. And it's almost like you becoming that thing that eats matter, and that matter that has been eaten is contributed to the neutron star gamma ray burst energy. And it appears that at first that the gravity may be pulling you away from that center in kind of, I should call it, centrifugal force. So now you find yourself in between those two forces, the centrifugal force, which is ego, and the 0 point force, quantum field if you want to call it, or a I don't know if I should call it gravity, but yes, this is the word that we use. There's a centrifugal force and a gravity. Okay, and the and another thing that you may experience, why do you kind of slide into that still state when you go in between of attention and awareness? It may be that your focus is in this event horizon area, and as you're there in the event horizon, because you're not pushing yourself there, right, and you're not giving into the centrifugal force, you're just gently going into that event horizon. And as soon as you get into that event horizon, it just like puts you back into the 0 point state. So you can't take the kingdom of God by storm. You got to go in a certain angle, and that is that delicate capacity of focus between attention and awareness that may need some practice at first, but you can be better and better at it. That's against my personal experience. So it is like booting up like this nuclear reactor within yourself, but it's not, at least not wasn't for me, it is not a smooth sailing journey. That decision, once you make that decision and once you touch that 0 point and you realize, oh, that's home frequency, or whatever you want to call it, I don't ever want to not to be in my field of reality. I want this to be in the background of my field of reality all the time, because that is where it's supposed to be. You recognize this as a normal state of consciousness that's been sort of, for some reason, um, forgotten about or whatever. But you realize, oh, no, no, that is me. That is where I'm meant to be living and experiencing uh, my reality through that lens of the black hole, the neutron star. There's this gamma ray burst, which is um, white light or bliss energy and a peace, and they both together create this primordial state. And then this white light scatters into colors, so that one primordial feeling of of white light, if you will, turns into 7 feelings. Okay, and the second it does scatter into those other frequencies, it starts raining, and so it creates a toroidal field, and it goes back into that disk of matter. But now, because it's been organized, it's going back and joins the queue. And as you're alchemizing this old energy, that new energy that you just manifest is coming to you. So as you can see by looking at this little model of stellar object, which is the center of galaxy, if you will, you can see how the time works. You can see how your new manifestation is coming because it's in a pipeline, and this is why you cannot speed it up, right? You say, well, you already manifested that. You already feel those feelings that whatever that manifestation will give you, but it's on a pipeline coming to you, and it has to go through this. So then you end up saying, like, okay, there's a lot more for me to alchemize and keep. So there's this period in your life of alchemizing the old matter and organizing into the new matter, right? That becomes this. You see what I'm saying? Like, and I don't know the exact time frame or maximum time it is necessary for you when you become when that it becomes your daily focus, your habit, when the 0 point is or must be the basis of your reality, and anything outside of it you don't feel at home. And because it's accessible on the moment's notice, you can always find it at the moment's notice, and so you always return there. And so, okay, so what I'm trying to say here is that it appears to be cycles of time that are necessary for you to go through and keep on going to that event horizon until all of that matter is being recycled and or regenerated, and in something that you do want to experience, right? um and so then all of these distortions, as I call it, people call it traumas, for example, but I don't call them traumas, because trauma implies that there was an external damage that's been done to the system. It wasn't like that. You come in incarnation with those distortions as a voluntary choice to play this game of life. But the only way you can play that game of life, that tree of life, is if you become aware that there is this game and you begin playing it. And then once you start playing it, first of all, you can back out, and it appears that every single distortion is going to be highlighted for you through the way of time. And it may take a specific event in your life, someone is triggering something, and sometimes you don't even need nobody to trigger you. The feeling comes off. That negative feeling is to you, hey, there's another one, there's another one, there's another one. And it's kind of pushing you away. It's giving you that centrifugal force and pushing you away from the center. And you got to go always into the event horizon and make that choice to alchemize that. And it appears that uh, there are these cycles, and that there, but it appears to be like, for example, there's, okay, that every 260 days there is a specific cycle. Mayan calendar is talking about that, and harmonic calendar is talking about that, and that the next cycle of 260 days there's going to be a little twist to it, but it's going to be pretty much the same. And those 260 days, there are almost all of these distortions are being highlighted, which means it gives you an opportunity to alchemize everything, more or less in a year. But that rite of passage journey is a tough, you know, it may be tough. It is tough. It was for me. I don't know. Maybe for somebody else it's not that tough. But there seems to be that there is this rite of passage where, until that focus becomes a automated state of consciousness. This is why I said that the alchemist appears to be a vocation that is very short lived. Because at some point, once you went through all these specific patterns of time, then they are just a little bit different next year or the next year. They're not that much different. That's why you're not thrown off of your center. There is a very little alchemical focus you may need to do, if any, because it becomes such a habit that you don't feel like you have done anything. It just becomes automated. So what I'm communicating here, I think it's a very real and very realistic coming online process, for the souls. I'm not saying something, outside of what I've experienced, and it appears that everything corresponds to the lawful process, and is nothing outside natural. To say that happens instantaneously will not be true, even though the states of consciousness of 0 point access instantaneously. But then you go to sleep, wake up the next day, and you may wake up no longer in that state, and you may need to move and give effort to go back to that state and have your focus and synchronization, whatever you want to call it, to fall back through the cracks into that state again. And that's the process of alchemy. And sometimes it doesn't want to let you in there, and it may take you a deliberate, few hours of focus, a few days of focus, sometimes. And sometimes it's quite easy, right? But that's the game. And if you don't give up on this game, I can guarantee you that in one cycle, I can't say in 1 year, because I have to say in one cycle, because what normally can happen is that this specific time for that distortion to be alchemized comes along. But if you don't do it, if you pacify it and you skip it, that's okay. It's gonna come in the next cycle. This is why, if you so focus on it, 100%, and you don't let anything slip, which I don't think, that's ideal. It didn't happen to me, even though I had all this time to do this. There were times where I was very aware that that particular test I did not pass. But that's okay, because it's coming in the pipeline the next year, or the next cycle, I should say, or the next 260 days a year. And I will have another opportunity to alchemize that as well. So that's why the realistic time frame is not just 260 days, right? It's you see what I'm trying to say, okay? It's if you ideally do everything perfect within that time frame, okay, that's it. The next year is going to be, everything's kind of easy. But if you, the moments that you skip, the next year is going to come in, and you're going to have time where you're going to have to go through this. Okay. Now, this aligns perfectly with other observations and maybe anecdotal reports of, for example, people like Krishnamurti. People are listening to his talks, which he was pointing all the time to only one thing, to the 0 point, and saying that the only problem and what is ego is a logic's invasion of psyche. Where the logos supposed to be in charge, logics takes over, and that's the only problem. That's what we call ego. That ego is the only problem, and it's not necessary to live a life, to live a very good life. And I should even say that harmonious life without suffering. Challenges come along, but they're all dealt with in an elegant way. And that's how you play the game. You see what I'm trying to say? It's enjoyable. A game must be enjoyable. It cannot be suffering. It cannot be, like, it's obvious, right? Like, if you are not enjoying the game, then it means you don't know how to play it. Because if you play the game and you enjoy it, then you must know how to play it. Anyway, all right, so let's just move on now from this. Sorry, let me pause this for a second because of the noise, but I hope it's not going to be for too long. One moment. Okay, let's continue. So, as I was saying, right? And this is something that you can observe. If you're listening to my videos, you must have, felt this experience and woken up one day for no reason whatsoever, and there's all these negative, feelings that are floating around. And if you don't do this alchemical process first and fall through the cracks into the 0 point and alchemize that, it's sometimes, like I call it, spiritual BDSM. I was just jokingly calling that, but people seem to get the point better when they start looking at it like that, because it is a bit like that. It does require a lot of surrender and courage. Okay. So what I'm trying to say, it does happen. And if you look closely, you will find that it is to do with the calendar. And it's more to do with like this harmonic calendar, because it's real astrology. And it does happen. Okay? And so what we see here is that time is to do with this. The solution is always the same, which is going to the event horizon to get to the 0 point. That there are 4 types of challenges. There's the negative feeling takes the shape of pressure, pain, I would call it nausea, and confusion. That is earth, fire, water, air, those 4 elements. Okay, and everything works like a clockwork. And I did not read this in the book. I just start making notes of what the hell is going on with me. And then I said, like, okay, what kind of feeling is this? Yeah, this is a lot of pressure. And so, okay, so then it took me like, a few days to alchemize all that pressure, which just turned into like this, background of peaceful energy. And sometimes it was pain. And sometimes there was this feeling, it was like, what the fuck is this? It's not pain. It's not pressure. It's not this fogginess, confusion. What the fuck is this? And I realized that that's like the poison, the feeling of poison. It's when something gets rancid. When the water stays for too long, this and it's like a swamp energy, right? And the best word that I can name it is a poison or nausea. You know, there must be a better word for it, but that's the feeling. If I were to say that you feel like you've been poisoned, then probably you would relate to that, because it's not like, okay, it's not pain, it's not pressure, but it's this feeling that it's like it's definitely negative feeling, but it's neither pain, neither pressure, and not a fogginess. It's this distinct feeling. And so I found there are four of them, and I was very careful to see if there is more or not, but I could not find more. uh, Anything. It seems to be a combination of those two. And then I realized that yes, there are matter, and your soul must be empty of matter, right? You cannot have matter in your soul. That's the whole point. And the matter has to be only in your physical experience. Okay, so now we are at okay, feelings. Now, another thing you may say, okay, feelings, but sometimes, of course, I'm experiencing emotions, right? And they may be negative emotions, which come with the negative thoughts, usually. Or it may be positive emotions, which come with positive thoughts. And so the emotion part of it comes from the feeling. Okay? If you feel giddy and, and laughing a lot and making jokes and stuff like that, that comes from that feeling. Okay? And that feeling, like I said, one of those 7 feelings that later splits into, your experience. And humor is like emotion that comes from the orange color of that feeling. I don't want to get into these details, but what I'm trying to say that it's another layer of experience which we call emotions. There's feelings, emotions, then thoughts. Okay, and now look, at this point, it was all subjective. I want you to be really careful and look at it. The feeling is a subjective experience. You are experiencing the feeling. And as we learned, you can change the negative feeling into the positive feeling through alchemy and devotion, as I call it, or a specific focus between attention and awareness. Okay? Subjective. Now, from there, emotions may start flowing. Emotions is something that, if you're in a good state of feeling, emotions seem to be more like spontaneous occurrences. It's just like a music. So if we were to look at those 7 feelings as 7 strings, right, which is just like a pure tone, it's a feeling. You take you fling a second string, and it feels like a feeling. Now, when you start making patterns out of this, you create the music. And now when you're creating the music, you are creating emotion. Emotion is none other than patterned feeling. That's what emotion is. It's a patterned feeling. It's when the pattern comes into existence. Before it was just like a soup of colors, but then they become patternized. Now it's emotions. Okay, still subjective, because you are experiencing within yourself those emotions. Now those emotions bring pictures in your mind, which are thoughts. I don't want to go into too much of the details in the thoughts, but there's 7 levels of thought, starting with the the first thought would be there's me experiencing something. The first thought is I am, and then I am this, I am that. Just then you name it, like I feel this, I feel that, I feel this emotion, that. Okay, but that's not necessarily ego yet. And there's only later thought, which is to do with things. Uh, when that thought starts taking responsibility rather than this primordial thought, which is I am, that stems from the feeling, that's when the ego is born. But anyway, I don't, like I said, I didn't want to go into this, but I kind of did. But forget about it. Thought, right? Emotion, thought. Now, the feeling, emotion, and thought are all subjective experiences. Now, thought is actually an image. Because if you look at thought, if you're observing thought, you'll see that it's a pattern that is imaginary. It's happening inside of you, right? Like it's subjective experience. Thought is a subjective experience. Okay? The feeling, emotion, thought, all subjective experience. Okay? So I mean, let's just look at this for 1 second, because I think it's really important, and this is where, like, this is something that's kind of overlooked. It's very rational, very obvious, and we have to conclude that if it's really true that your feelings, emotions, and thoughts is a subjective experience, then all your connections and all your relationships with other, which is why I say the other is like this me experiencing something, right? There's me and other, me and other, me and other, me experiencing this feeling, me experiencing the emotion, me experiencing the thought. That's where the otherness comes from. So which means at this point, the otherness was all subjective experience, which means that all relationships that you have with other people is your subjective experience. It cannot be. Relationships and connections with other beings is a subjective experience. Now, if you really get this point, that could give you a lot of relief, because it becomes very clear that if you want to have better relationships, the only thing that you got to take care of is your subjective experience of what feelings you have, what emotions you have, and what thought patterns you're experiencing. And that will automatically make better relationships, because that's what better relationship is. But I have to say, only the last bit, we went from the seed to germ to flower, and only the fruit, which becomes your sensations in this physical world, only the fruit becomes an objective experience. And only with the fruit or objective world, logics must be used, not with connections and feelings, which we observed, that the connection with other human being is none other but the feeling that I have, the emotion that I have, and the thought patterns that I have. That is what defines the connection with other. As you can see, at no point the logics have any kind of play in it. The logics must only be used in objective reality to move things, one object to another, and organize the logistics of your world. As I say, the purpose of logics is to create and maintain systems that are functional in a physical reality. And that's the only purpose, the correct use of logic. Okay, and so that's why logic is used only for objective reality. Now, this is just like a, a tip of the iceberg above the water, but the whole thing is below, and that is subjective. But what we do, we think that that is not subjective and that is objective. And so if we see somebody, for example, behave in a certain way, we create an image of them, which becomes your subjective experience, and then they keep on showing you the same image because you created a belief about that person. But because that person is your subjective experience, now it has a huge consequences. I know it does put you into the chair of responsibility of every connection that you have with another person or a being. Even if they're the most mechanical and soulless being, there is a specific relationship that you may have with them. And that usually may be just complete stillness and silence and no interaction. Nevertheless, there is from what kind of feeling you have about that entity. And like if that entity is the most mechanical and dysfunctional and whatever, the feeling that you should have or like ultimately would have, if you really alchemized, you would see that there is nothing there, and therefore you would feel nothing. You would feel just peace about that thing that was pissing you off. But because you see how it really is, you saw that that's just the mechanics. It doesn't attach to anything. It's just a thought part floating around. And I thought that that's like an entity with self-authority. That is just basically ego that is detached from its own source. Which means, because it's detached from its own source, if you experience that entity from that 0 point, you're not giving any fuel to that entity to function. And therefore, that particular thought form, which is your own thought, is going to be dissipating. This is like the highest point of leverage. And in fact, like if you look at some entity and you say like, okay, that's the biggest piece of shit, or that's the worst, how can there be this type of being? And the more rage it gives you, the more alchemical job you got to do. And the more alchemical job you do, the more peace there's going to be there, and possibly the more bliss. The less energy you're going to be giving to that entity. And they just can't survive. And this is what I'm really trying to communicate here. These quote unquote enemies or these entities, they cannot survive in a high frequency, high vibration environment, which is that stillness and that bliss. They just can't survive. And what does that mean? That means that this your attitude and your connection with that is as is, and you see that there's nothing there, so you don't have any kind of emotion about it. It's like being angry at the laptop that's programmed or like full of viruses. There's no point really being angry at the laptop. What you do is you're not getting angry at the laptop. You just wipe all the software and install a new one. You don't keep on fighting and using the laptop with all this bad software or malware or whatever and keep on fighting with this. No, you chill your balls. You wipe the software clean. You install a nice software that is more cooperative with you. Okay. If relationships sorry, if relationships is a subjective experience, which it is, it always is subjective experience, no matter. And I know that things may happen in your life, and you may say, no, there is an outside authority, And that illusion may appear, but that illusion only appears because of the ego function and logics intervening there. There is no outside because it's subjective in this particular thing. The things are existing in objective reality, of course. And so you can even see people as things, which is like a static thing, and and that's the thing. And you can see people as the things to exploit, and that's what usually happens when you apply ego. That's what ego does, which is misappropriate logic. That's what it does. It treats people like things, right? But logic is supposed to treat things as things and people as people, and you treat people not with logics, but with your own subjective state of experience. Okay. I hope I'm communicating this clear, and this is what's been happening and what I've been experiencing. Even though I clearly see that that's the case, I got to stop myself when I'm breaking this law, and I start, like for example, giving objective reality to my connections and relationships with other people. What does that mean? That means that I freeze and say, like, well, that person is like that, and then I have a negative emotion about that, and so I kind of freeze that. But if I give myself a little time and say, oh, wait a second, no, I'm making an error again, I'm assuming that it's not related to my subjective state of being. So I take that responsibility. I make sure that my subjective state of being is good, and my view about that person feels good to me. And then the job done. Then I leave it to the universe. That same person may change and give me what I'm vibrating about, which means I'm experiencing them as whatever the emotions and feelings and thought patterns that I'm experiencing. Or the universe brings me another person with that change. And I have to say that, do not expect stability during this period of this transition to the 0 point. Basically, forget about stability. Rationally thinking that after you go through it and you stabilize yourself in that home frequency, things around you will become stable again. And the same person will play out, the role continuously that is your vibe right now. But as you're going through this transition, don't look for a specific person, and don't try to fix specific relationship. It's really about your subjective experience of everything, and you don't control the objective reality. You let the universe decide who's going to be in front of you based on the feelings that you have. That's the priority. Okay? And if it brings you somebody that triggers you, you do the internal work again and see what happens. And yeah, and like I said, after it's gone, you're gonna get more stability, because it's just natural. Like, if you're floating on that disk of time, things around you are the same, right? Like you're somewhere and you have a relationship with all that things that are floating around you also. But once you start moving in there, everything is changing. All that information is getting recycled and new, and it's just, there's a lot of changes going on. Okay. All right. What else I have to say about this? Right. You may also have questions about, like, what about the soul? Like, don't people have their own souls? Because if you're saying that everything is subjective, it's like, how at what point there are others? Like, yeah, okay, there are other bodies, but what about the soul? Like, if all my connections is subjective experience, which means that everybody is going to be the feeling, emotion, and thought pattern to me. But there's obviously objective reality. Say like, well, there's all these people are so different, and they can be all feelings, emotions, and and thought patterns, because there's uniqueness about them. But the only uniqueness that I can find about them, because some of the patterns are universal, but the only uniqueness that I can find about them is the way their body is structured, even though that can change. It can change, obviously, as you go through internal changes. It can change even as you go through alchemical changes. Your body changes, you know? Because the alchemical change is basically like acquisition of a new soul. I know sometimes people call walk-ins and all these other things, but that is essentially what's going on after you go through all of this alchemical journey. There is appearance. There is a new energy. There's a new state of being here, right in this moment that it wasn't there before. So that new energy, you can call it a mature soul or a new soul, or whatever you want to call it. But there's a clear difference. It's a clear difference on a feeling level. Emotions and the way they come out of you, they may be the same. And so now it gets me to the point of like emotions. And so emotion, for example, you can observe of there is a specificity and uniqueness in emotions. Even though you may feel the exact same emotion, and the way I feel that emotion, the way you feel the emotion, it may be different. If it's the same emotion, but we're feeling it different. Or we may feel that emotion in a compatible way. That when I'm feeling that emotion and you feeling emotion, like whatever the patterns I'm experiencing, whatever patterns you're experiencing, they kind of match and go back into that awesome feeling. And so there's that. So the pattern, remember I said when the feeling is a pure tone, is a pure frequency, but when the pattern arises, that's what you would call the vibration, right? The music, it's a type of music. It has a pattern, it has a rhythm, it has a melody, whatever. That seems to be unique. Okay? So, but it is a unique, but is not sort of not repeatable. Perhaps it might be absolutely unique signature, but there might be similarities. For example, like laughter is probably like a good indicator. Also, the voice intonations can be also a good indicator of that emotional level. All these little patterns that you do with the voice, and especially with laughter, because laughter is not really a voluntarily controlled process. It's usually during the laughter there's the signature of your emotional patterns. And I think a lot of things can change. Even the types of feelings you experience can change. The thoughts that you're experiencing can change, but there's some peculiarity about that particular pattern of that emotion. Because, for example, my 7 feelings are exact same as your 7 feelings, but my emotions that stem from all these feelings may be different to yours, but they may be congruent on some levels, and that's when you would experience a connection with another soul. And so the way I see this, the connection with another soul is an emotional melody connection. It's like you play a certain type of melody with your emotions, another person playing a certain type of melody with their emotions, and when you get together, does that make, you know, a a masterpiece of music? And if that does, then there is a type of compatibility and a connection on the soul level. Okay, and it appears that that cannot be changed throughout the lifetime. Your ego dissolves, but your soul, which what is your soul? Your soul is a patterning of the feeling or your emotional print, but it's not acquired throughout the life. It's not programmed later, because whatever is acquired throughout the life, that's pretty much the, you know, what kind of feelings are your thoughts linked to, really. The negative feelings, then you see that, you know, the certain type of thoughts create negative feelings. Once you alchemize that, then you have these positive feelings, then there are new thoughts and linked to a nice thoughts. But this is all reprogrammable, right? And even like because your thoughts determine the way your body looks like, that can also be reprogrammed. Thoughts are reprogrammable. But appears, again, I'm just going through the observation. I did not read any books. I found it that it just confuses me, in because if somebody wrote that book not from the state of consciousness that I'm experiencing, it's just going to confuse. But I'm seeing what I'm seeing. Now, if you meet a person and you know them for many years, how they laughed when they were, 15, and how they laugh when they're 45, when they're like really spontaneous, you will find it's the same. They may be way different person. They may have, grown a lot and have little ego or no ego, whatever, but they will laugh the same way. And laughter is an emotion. So therefore, I have to say that is a something that is not changeable. I mean, you should. If it's not changeable, then you cannot program that into people, right? And why you can't program that into people? Because if the person is in a spontaneous state, not pre-programmed state, the laughter will come out involuntarily, and it will have that pattern, and that is the signature of the soul. And I will also say that signature relates even to many other body features. That the human face, is not just random. The human face does relate to the emotions and the feelings. Feelings, like I said, they can evolve. Negative feelings dissolve, positive feeling comes online. Emotion pattern does not. So there's a certain changes that you can experience within your lifetime as you grow as a soul, but certain things that will always be the same. And that pattern of exactness, which cannot be programmed, is always the same. It's your unique imprint of your soul. And it's kind of logical to say that when you split, let's say, this one soul, which is like white light, for example, and you start making patterns, and then you say like, well, this particular, aperture is focused on this pattern. This particular is focused on this pattern, and that focus on this specific patterning creates this multiplicity and appearance of multiplayer game. even though it's just one. Really, there's just only one player, but because it takes a specific type of patterns within that big, field of, let's say, mandala, and it's focused on that particular one, it appears that they all must fit back into the one whole, right? They all must fit back into the one whole, and the yin and yang, meaning that all the feminine parts are with all the masculine parts. So it may be that all this fracture of the masculine and the feminine is where, like, all these pieces of the puzzle come together. This is why sometimes people have soul recognition, or what you call soulmate, because there's an emotional compatibility. That's why. Okay? Like I said, that will not change. As the person is growing and developing and alchemizing those negative feelings, there's more and more positive feelings that in the body, and so therefore more and more positive emotions, but those emotions are going to be unique for that particular soul. And that's how I explain the difference and the uniqueness of each individual being, even though it's still subjective experience. But if you experience, like, this is why sometimes people say sense of humor connects people, because if you're experiencing a certain type of jokes, or like the humor that you do, or the way you play everything, right, that is your signature, and someone else can respond to this very well, and when there is this resonance, there is this connection. This is why this is why there seems to be unique connections that are not replaceable. That is just the way it is. And this is why, yes, it does give you responsibility of the quality of your life, but certain things are, like, if you are going to be experiencing these types of feelings, and there's going to be the interpretation of these feelings into the way you're experiencing your emotions, and you keep on vibrating, that's your signature, right? That's the complement. You will attract complementary vibration to that vibration. That's unique. This is why it's not just anybody can fit there. This is why, like, you meet somebody and the person may be like perfect on the paper or whatever, but there is no emotional overlap. You see? And then you meet somebody and the paper may be not really there, but there's an emotional overlap. And so if you choose the paper and the list and say, well, I need this, and that, then you're missing the point and you are connecting over ego. But if you recognize the emotional compatibility, and there may be all sorts of challenges that alchemical challenges you need to alchemize, but the emotional compatibility is still going to be there, now you're getting somewhere. Now you're connecting with the person on a love level. And if that's your partner, if that's your, other half, so to speak, you're going to create really good looking babies. That's what I just saw somebody talk about this point, and I realized why this is it. If you make babies out of love, they're going to be really good looking. But if you make babies out of ego, they're going to be, I'm sorry to say, a bit retarded. But and not in a good way either. Uh, Damn it! See, like I'm not a politically correct person here. But anyway, and this is obviously scientifically, physically, and metaphysically can it be observed. You can't say that, you know, there's harmonious patterns, and so what kind of creation you're going to do from the harmonious patterns, and those that are disharmonious patterns, and what kind of creation you're going to do out of those, of course. And the creation is your offspring. This is why, of course, beautiful people are made out of love. This statement would say that. But I also have to say that it is possible to be beautiful these days through all sorts of artificial means. Beautiful, handsome, whatever, right? But you see, nature takes care of it. Like if you follow the nature, and which means you play the game of life in the right way, you value harmony over conflict and all these other things. You know how to alchemize it, and so therefore you produce everything that is harmonious and beautiful around you. And don't be hating because somebody played the game right. You know, you can do too. What can do? I'm not advertising any toilet paper here, okay? This channel is not monetized. Never will be monetized because how can you monetize me? I'm not ad friendly. I'm not corpo friendly. And I like to get money when there's actual tangible value that is created that I can see. Somebody receives some value and they want to give me money, then I will take it gladly. Money, money, money. All right. I think this is where we end. It's been a good one, huh? If you're still here, congratulations, you're a gangster. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace.